وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. اللهم افتح علينا بحكمتك وانشر علينا برحمتك يا ذا الجلال والإكرام. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله عدد كمال الله كما يليق بكماله. يا عليم علمنا من علمك ما ترضى به عنا ولا تؤاخذنا بما تعلمه منا. يا حليم خلقنا بخلق الحلم وحققنا بحقائق العلم. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. I'm very happy to be here with you. It's a great joy and a great honor for me to be here. May Allah enable us all to live this religion and to cultivate between ourselves the kinds of bonds of respect and of brotherhood and sisterhood that the Prophet taught us to cultivate, and to be able to build communities that can really bring this religion to life, bi-idhnillahi ta'ala, in our own selves and in the communities around us. The topic that we're talking about today is getting our minds right and how Muslims seek truth in this age. And this is a very big topic, and I just want to address certain aspects of it today, bi-idhnillahi ta'ala. And we have a pretty good amount of time, so also I would like to be able to discuss things with you so that we can have questions and we can have back and forth, and it's not just a one-way street. History is one of the greatest signs of Allah in creation. Allah is the Lord of history. Allah is the creator of history. He is Maliku Yawmuddin. He is the owner and the possessor of the Day of Judgment. And the Day of Judgment when all human beings who ever lived and all of the spirits who were ever created, they will all be brought together on this earth. This earth will be transformed utterly, and it will be one huge continent. No islands, no peninsulas, one huge continent surrounded by one sea, and that sea will be fire. And all human beings who ever lived will be brought back to life, and all the spirits, and God will send down His angels in ranks, and they will gather the people to the places where each of them is meant to go for the judgment. And the awaiting of the judgment is the greatest tribulation that you and I will ever face. May we live and die as believers, and may we be safe in the next world. If we live this life in a way that jeopardizes the hereafter, then we have made a very bad bargain. What counts in this life is to live as a good, believing human being and to be safe in the next life. That is what counts, and we ask Allah Azza wa Jal to give us that. But one of the things we see on the Day of Judgment, of course, the Day of Judgment takes a long time to get started, because when all of these people who are gathered together from thousands of generations that we don't even know about, including the generations of the spirits who were before us, they lived in this world before we did. They had kingdoms here. They had history here. Before that is done, the whole world is engulfed in the wrath of God, the ghadab. God's wrath is now manifested. That now all of this history that began thousands of years ago, it has come to an end. And what did we do that was good? Of course, there are people who are believers. There were the messengers and the prophets. There were those who followed them. There were those who struggled to live their way. And these people are the reason for creation. And of course, the day of judgment will be the great crowning of their glory. But in the beginning, you don't see that. They are all under the banner of praise, Liwa'ul Hamd, which is a huge banner that can be seen from thousands of miles away. And it is green, and it extends to the east, and it extends to the west, and it extends also to the south. It is huge, and the earth is flat. There are no mountains, there are no valleys, there are no rivers. Okay, and there under the banner of praise will be the beloved of the beloved, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and Jesus, the son of Mary, and Moses, the son of Imran, and there will be there Noah and Abraham and Adam and all the prophets. Okay, these are true beliefs. And then the believers will be with them. But the believers also are in a state of great anxiety, waiting for judgment. Because who will I really turn out to be? And what of my actions were really accepted? So there's no more difficult time than we face than the time of awaiting for judgment. And therefore, one of the greatest mercies of God to creation is the great intercession of the Prophet, which in hadith is referred to as ash-shafa'atul kubra, the major intercession, which is established not only by authentic hadith, but hadith which some scholars would say are mutawatira. They are so abundantly narrated that they are beyond doubt. And then, as we know in the hadith of intercession, that the Prophet will then make these beautiful prayers. He will bow and prostrate himself to Allah, and he will ask God to begin the judgment. That's what that does. And then, after waiting and waiting, and for the disbeliever, the waiting is like 50,000 years. Then it begins, and that is the first mercy, and that is the first relief. Even for people who are really horrible, and they know they are horrible, and they know that they will go to the fire, they are relieved that I will now be judged. I will now be given what I deserve. I will now be placed in the place where I deserve to go. And so they are relieved. Even if they are damned and they go into the fire, they are relieved to do that. The Prophet tells us the story of two men who were believers, and they were very disobedient. They were disbelievers, and they are condemned to the fire. And on the day of judgment, they are even told, you did these things, you did these things, you were forgiven, and you did it again. And then they're going to the fire. The angels are driving them to the fire, and they have their heads down, and then one of them looks back at the place of judgment as if, like, he's in this state of confusion. And then the angels ask about that. And he said, I am worse than God has declared me to be. I deserve worse than has been given to me. I'm 100 times worse than that. I'm 1,000 times worse than that. But in my heart, I knew Allah's mercy. And in my heart, I had expectations of His mercy. And I hoped that I might be forgiven. And then Allah makes him the first one to be released from the fire, because He will release all believers from the fire. that because you had that hope in your heart and because you never let it die, even now, come back, go to the garden, be forgiven. So these are true things. But one of the most important things about the Day of Judgment is that it is the replay of human history. What really happened here? Who really said what? Who really did what? What was the nature of these battles and these wars and these murders and these conspiracies and all these things that happened? Because on the Day of Judgment, that will be clear for all humanity to see. And this is why the Day of Judgment is also the greatest testimony to Allah's glory. Subhanallah. That Allah does no injustice in creation. Nothing that He does is in vain. Nothing that He does is meaningless or mistaken. Even if it is the suffering of people for 1,000 years. You will see on the Day of Judgment that all of this had wisdom in it. And on that day, everything will be redressed. Everything will be redressed. And the people who cried and cried, they will now laugh and they will be happy. One of the great signs of Allah in creation is the diamond. And probably some of the sisters like diamonds. Diamonds are very beautiful. Diamonds are very pure. Diamonds are the clearest of all minerals that I know anything about. What is the diamond made of? Coal. Coal. Coal that is only good for being burned. And yet you take that coal and you put it deep in the earth under pressure of thousands and thousands of tons and under heat. And then by miraculous transformation, the coal turns into a diamond. It's like the exact opposite of what it was. And this is what we will see on the Day of Judgment too. That all of the suffering, all of the trials, all of the sadness that the believers went through, and their children, and their children's children, all of this that looked like coal is now diamonds. It's all diamonds. We ask Allah to enable us to transform the world around us, which has in it so much difficulty. We have cities like the wonderful city of Detroit, which is basically ruined, down and out. Islam could bring it back to life. Islam could definitely do that. Islam could turn it into a garden. That's true. It could. And in fact, we pray to Allah that we do that because of the fact that that's all that can save this country. This country cannot continue to flourish if its inner cities are sick, if they're filled with drugs and crime and unemployment and things like that. That can't be. And Islam does have the potential to do things like that. Usually in history, when Islam spreads because it provides the combination to the lock that nobody else has, that nobody else dreamed of having. And so it is able to solve the problems that no one else could solve. We did that in many places in the world. We did that in many places. Islam is the gift of civilization. Okay, we might find that difficult to believe today because, unfortunately, a lot of us are down and out. A lot of our Muslim countries are down and out. So we forget how things once were, and maybe we don't even have knowledge of that. Maybe we didn't even know. But Islam is the great civilization producer. And may we see that miracle in this land. May we see that in Flint. May we see that in Detroit. May we see that throughout the country, bi-idhnillahi ta'ala. But history is, as you know, it's the Day of Judgment. Allah is Maliku Yawmuddin. He is the owner and the king of the day of judgment. And we have to understand that all the things that play out around us, they are just the pretext of the judgment. That's what's happening. It's like we're not in the judgment yet, but that's what's going on. Every person is living out their destiny. Everyone is taking that destiny that is within them. So we refer to life as a test. It's an ibtila. Okay? But historians would say also that history is challenge and response. Challenge and response. And we would say that's the way that Allah's test works. Okay? That Allah gives us challenges. And then human beings respond to those challenges. And in the history of civilizations fall when they are no longer able to meet the challenge. In the beginning, when civilizations are growing and when they're strong, they are also challenged, but they have the means to meet that challenge. The Sahaba, radiallahu anhum, they come out of a blessed peninsula, the Arabian Peninsula. It's like a subcontinent. Incredible place. Big and beautiful. Many of you have been there. It's beautiful. It's a desert, but it's got mountains. It has oases. It is incredible. And it was created by God to be totally sheltered. The Arabian Peninsula. You have the Hijaz, which is all volcanic mountains. Hijaz means the barrier, because you cannot come into the Hijaz in the old days unless you have the help and the permission of the tribes who live there, because it is too rough. If you are there, you can find beautiful gardens. You can find oases, all of those mountains of the Hijaz, some of which are very high. They have in them water. They have oases. Sometimes you will find trees there that go back to the Ice Age. Types of trees that have been preserved there in the mountains that were in the Ice Age. But because of the way the sun is and the shade is and the water, they're still there. And you have leopards, you have different kind of animals. Okay, so the peninsula, the Arabian Peninsula, could support life. It could support tribes. Okay, but it is protected from the outside, and also it's very difficult for those tribes to live any other way. Okay, so this is the way the Arabian Peninsula was. It was a tribal society. It kept the Semitic language, which we call Arabic, which is ancient Semitic. The Arabic language, the word Arabic implies that it is the clear language. It is the articulate language. But that language was preserved by the peninsula because no one could come in to change it. No one could change it. And then you had also with Abraham the re-establishment of the pilgrimage to Mecca and the house of Allah in Mecca. And then the sacred months, the 4 sacred months of the year in which it's not permissible to fight. And so then also, even though the tribes will fight, and even though they have rivalries, they will be at peace for 1/3 of the year. 4 months of the year. And they will meet in Mecca. They will make the pilgrimage. Sometimes they'll make peace. Sometimes they will intermarry. They will also trade with each other. And so these were the amazing things, that the pilgrimage would keep them together as a people, and the peninsula would protect them from the outside and give them everything they want. Allah says in the Quran, جَعَلَ اللَّهُ الْكَعْبَةَ الْبَيْتَ الْحَرَامَ قِيَامًا لِلنَّاسِ وَالشَّهْرَ الْحَرَامَ وَالْهَدْيَ وَالْقَلَائِدِ. That God made the Kaaba, the first house for the worship of God, the blessed Kaaba, the form of which is exactly like the first temple of Solomon. The same building, same thing. Okay, the same structure. We think of the Temple of Solomon as this big thing. That would be like thinking of the Kaaba as the mosque around the Kaaba. Okay, because the Temple of Solomon, it has in it the place where the Ark of the Covenant is kept. And that building looks just like the Kaaba. And the tent, the tabernacle of the covenant that Moses had in the desert, it also looks just like that. It's got the same structure. Okay, so Allah made the Kaaba. جَعَلَ اللَّهُ الْكَعْبَةَ الْبَيْتَ الْحَرَامِ, the inviolable house, the sacred house. قِيَامًا لِلنَّاسِ, He made it as a qiyam for the people. And one recitation of the Quran says قِيَامًا لِلنَّاسِ, that He made it as a guardian of the people. He made it as a king of the people, a protector of the people, a qiyam. Also qiyam, that He made it a source of life, something that gave them an economic livelihood, and other kind of livelihood. He made it a livelihood for them. جعل الله الكعبة البيت الحرام قياما للناس والشهر الحرام, and the inviolable month, meaning the sacred months. What were the sacred months? Who knows? There are 4. What are the sacred months? Very good. Akramakillah. And not Ramadan. Not Ramadan. Many people say, Ramadan. No, Ramadan is a blessed month, but it's not a sacred month. The sacred months, the inviolable months, are Rajab. Rajab, which is the 7th lunar month that comes in the middle of the year. And it was called Rajabul Fard, Rajab the solitary. And it was also called Rajabul Asam, Rajab that is deaf, because you're not supposed to hear weapons in that month. You better not hear weapons in that month. No fighting. And then you have Dhul Qa'dah, Dhul Hijjah, the month of pilgrimage. And the month before that, the 11th and 12th month. And then you have Muharram, the inviolable month, which is the first month of the year. And for over almost 3,000 years, from the time of Abraham till the time of our Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, the Arabs the sons of Ishmael and their brothers in the Arabian Peninsula, whom we call the pure Arabs or the original Arabs, they protected this very carefully, and they rarely ever violated the sacred months. And the Sahaba tell us, because they remember how it was, that even in their time, they say that a man would encounter during the sacred months the man who murdered his father, and yet he would do nothing. Or the man who killed his uncle or his brother, and they would do nothing because it is forbidden to fight. Forbidden. And Umar ibn al-Khattab, may Allah be pleased with him, he tells us that Allah would retaliate. That's why the Arabs did it. Not just that they were extremely pious, it's that if you violate this month, Allah will retaliate right now. جَعَلَ اللَّهُ الْكَعْبَةَ, Allah made the Kaaba, and Allah made the sacred month. قِيَامًا لِلنَّاسِ. Okay, so they had that. And then الشهر الحرام والهدي. Al-Hadi is the sacrificial animal that you take to pilgrimage. So when we go to pilgrimage, especially in the old days, people would take a camel, or they would take a cow, or they would take a sheep or a goat, and they would mark it in a certain way so that everybody knows that this animal has been designated for sacrifice in the pilgrimage or the Umrah. Okay, and then people won't touch that either, and they won't touch the people that are guiding it, because they are guests of Allah. So even if it's not in the sacred months, even in the other months, like Ramadan, if they have the hadi and they're going to Mecca, the Arabs would not touch them. That's what we're told in the tafsir books. And al-qala'id are the garlands. We don't use the word garland very much anymore, but the qala'id are garlands. They are beautiful sort of like necklaces that are weaved together that you put on animals. Some people do that. They decorate their cattle for certain festivals. Those are garlands, but the garlands would be made usually from idkhar, which is a particular type of aromatic plant that grows in Mecca. And that's one of the plants that you can take from the haram, because Mecca is in the haram, it's in the sanctuary. So they would take that plant and they would take it home and they would put it in their ceilings or roofs because it smells really good. But also when people see that, oh, they've got garlands on their animals, it means they are coming back from Mecca. So you don't touch them. This was an amazing thing. This is the way that the Arabian Peninsula was. And the Sahaba, may Allah be pleased with them, they are produced by that. They've never known government. They never knew a king. They never knew an administration. They never knew taxation. They lived in a tribal society, a beautiful tribal society. Okay? They lived in that, and then they are made the heirs of the world. With the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he would tell the Sahaba sometimes, how many times a day did they eat? The companions of the Prophet. You eat 3, 4, 5 times a day, right? We often eat too many times a day. The Sahaba, how many times did they eat a day? Once. Usually they eat once. Is that because they don't want to eat twice or it's haram to eat twice? No, it's because they don't have any food. They don't have any food. So they will usually eat in the morning, before dawn or after dawn, and maybe they fast that day and pray to God that they have something to break fast with. That's the way most of them live. And the Prophet asked them once, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and how will you be when you eat twice a day? And they said, Messenger of Allah, Messenger of God, will that be true? Will there come a time when we eat twice a day? That's the way it was. These are the people who will then be given the inheritance of the world. The inheritance of the world, the Persian Empire, and everything in it. Access to China and India and all the great trade routes. And Muslims will become the greatest economic power in the world for almost 1,000 years. And then they will be given the lion's share of Byzantium and the Roman Empire. Tremendous wealth beyond any challenge. And what was their response? Their response is one of the most remarkable in history. That out of this they produce one of the greatest civilizations the world has ever seen. And this is because of the fact that they were able to meet the challenge. They had the light the Prophet had given them, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They had the knowledge that Allah and His Messenger had given them. They had sincerity and truthfulness. And they had also self-confidence. They were very humble people, but they were also very self-confident people. And they knew that everything is from Allah, the Persian Empire, the Byzantine Empire, all these civilizations, and we will make something better. That's remarkable. It's absolutely remarkable. So history is the story of challenge and response. And Muslims met challenges throughout their history that are absolutely astounding. And time after again, they responded to them in brilliant and original ways. And that's why we got the legacy of Islamic civilization and the knowledge it produced, the science it produced, and other things. Today, we as Muslims here in Michigan and the United States, we find ourselves in a great challenge. A challenge which, if we were to sit and talk about it in full, is maybe more than we can dare to imagine. At the same time, we are a remarkable community, and we are growing, and we are accomplishing things. This mosque is an example of that. We are doing great things, and if we know our brothers and sisters, we also know that they are very talented. That among us, among you, there are very talented men and women, many times very accomplished men and women. So we have people who are capable of responding to the challenge. And we are surrounded by many tests. Of course, all of us are aware of the fact today that in this country there are interest groups who would like to see that Islam in America is just finished forever, that nothing will ever come of it. That's a challenge. That's a very serious challenge. We have also other challenges as well. We have challenges with our children. We have challenges with the internet. We have challenges with so many things, drugs, pornography, lots of things, big challenges. We also are an incredible community, extremely incredible community, but we have been picked by Allah out of the ranks of the whole Muslim world and the whole world. So we've got every ethnic group you could imagine. We've got every color that human beings come in. And we also have all social classes, all economic classes. That's a challenge. That is a big challenge. Okay? And then in these people, we have lights, every one of them. And one of the things about Islam, when you do Islam right, with sincerity and honesty and knowledge, is that it unleashes incredible creativity. Incredible creativity. We see that in our community, and we hope that we will see it more and more and more because of the fact that we will need that to meet the challenge. And one of the challenges that we face also is that we live in a time when the human mind has been turned upside down. Human beings today think in a way that they didn't used to think in earlier. Whether we're talking about people who lived here or in Europe or in the Muslim world. Modernity or post-modernity or transmodernity, whatever we choose to call it, this reality that we are part of, it has focused very much on the way we think, the words we use, the content we put in those words, and things that people would call paradigms, general understandings of the world. For example, and cognitive frames, which are particular understandings under the paradigms. For example, we all know that if we study history, we will probably be told about the old Stone Age. Okay, so why did you call it the Stone Age? And also, why do we use the word old? I mean, why couldn't we say the early age? Why do we name it that way? And again, because there is a particular worldview that is being endorsed by that word, which is Darwinian and based on evolutionism, that people were brutes, people were cave dwellers. They were ignorant and backward, and all these beasts could do is maybe make a stone club and beat you over the head with it and live in caves. Okay, so is that really the full story? Is that really the full story? And do all historians agree to that? Arnold Toynbee, who is one of the greatest historians of the modern age and one of the most brilliant, Toynbee, he said that I beg to differ. He said, I don't believe this for a minute. He said the most spiritually advanced of all human beings who ever lived on earth were those who lived in the earliest generations. And in the Quran, what does Allah tell you? وَالسَّابِقُونَ السَّابِقُونَ أُولَٰئِكَ الْمُقَرَّبُونَ فِي جَنَّاتِ النَّعِيمِ. Right? And then he says, ثُلَّةٌ مِّنَ الْأَوَّلِينَ. There, he's talking about the sabiqun. May Allah make us sabiqeen. The people who beat everybody else in the race, who get ahead of everybody else, the vanguards, the outstrippers. Like, he's running fast, you will run faster. He's about to get to the finish, you will get there faster. Sabiqun, you don't beat the sabiqeen. As-sabiqun, as-sabiqun. The sabiqun, they are the sabiqun. What can we say about them more than that? Because anything you imagine, it's going to be less than what they are. Ulaika al-muqarrabun. Those incredible muqarrabun. Because when we say ulaika there, we're saying those incredible muqarrabun. They're the people that God brought near to him. Okay? And then we're told they're in Jannatul Na'im. They are in gardens of paradise. Thullatun min al-awwalin. There are a lot of them among the first generations. Old Stone Age? No, I think we should be more polite than that. Thullatun min al-awwalin wa qalilun min al-akhirin. And a few of the later generations. We're definitely later generations. And may we be ashabul yameen, people of the right hand, but may we also be among the sabiqeen, muqarrabeen. It's not impossible, it's just very rare. It's very rare. So Toynbee said, I don't believe this. He said, because what have you done? You have taken a Darwinian cognitive frame based on evolutionism, and you are now forcing that on your understanding of a history that you know almost nothing about. What kind of archaeological remnants did Abraham leave? Well, of course, we know that he left the Kaaba. But that was a special act that he did. Abraham lived in a tent. Abraham, peace be upon him, raised sheep and goats and cattle. Abraham was one of the most perfect human beings in history. He didn't leave palaces. He didn't leave cities. He didn't build a factory. But can you beat Abraham? Can you do better than Abraham? And what about the people who lived with Abraham? Okay, so it's like, wait a minute. Let's be honest. The fact is that we don't have a whole lot of evidence about early people. And we certainly don't have a complete story. And moreover, we have incredible evidence to the contrary, because human beings speak languages. We speak languages. Arabic is one of the purest forms of Semitic in the world. And we know this by very careful scientific study of linguistics. And we can say on the basis of very careful scientific study of linguistics that Arabic, as spoken by the Blessed Prophet ﷺ, was spoken that way for at least 10,000 years, if not more. Which happens to, by the way, to take you back into the old Stone Age. It's the whole new Stone Age, and what came after that of the so-called Copper and Bronze and Iron Age, it takes you way back to the very earliest period. Okay, and Arabic is an incredible language. Umar, may Allah be pleased with him, he said, عليكم بالعربية فإنها تزيد في العقل والمروءة. He says, you have to preserve Arabic. And here, with all respect to our beloved brothers and sisters who come from the Arab world, he's not talking about dialects. And the dialects we honor and respect. And they're beautiful. They're sweet. But they are not al-Arabiya. Al-Arabiya is al-Fusha. It is the language of the Quran and Hadith, which you know also if you're an Arab, because you learn that. It's not hard for you. Okay, but that is the language of intellect. Wallahi, absolutely. It is precise to a degree that is unimaginable. It gives us aql, and it gives us muru'ah, which is the perfect expression of the man and the woman. Muru'ah is the perfect expression of human virtue, because your virtue is connected to your language. I know people in West Africa who are the descendants of kings, and they have a beautiful language, which belongs to a family all by itself. And these people don't have words for cursing. And they don't have words for talking about other people's families or, astaghfirullah, other people's mothers. They don't even have words for that. And if you were to speak that way, they would put you out of the tribe because they have decency. And the decency is in the tongue they speak. Okay, language is important. Language has a lot to do with virtue. Language has a lot to do with morality. Language has a lot to do with manhood and womanhood, morality. But also, language has a great deal to do, as Sayyidina Umar said, with aql, intellect, the way we think. If you want to destroy a people, destroy their language. Keep them ignorant about language. They don't really know how to use it. And then you will manipulate them and basically do with them what you want to do. You want to give people freedom and liberty and justice, teach them language. And if we're English speakers, teach them English. Malcolm X, Al-Hajj Malik, may Allah be pleased with him. I love him. He's the one who brought me to Islam. How could I not love him? Malcolm read the dictionary from A to Z because in prison he knew, I've got to get an education. I've got to be able to use this language the way other people use it. And he began with what? Aardvark. The first word in the dictionary, A-A-R-D-V-A-R-K, aardvark, which is a little type of anteater. He said, I'll never forget about aardvark. It's the first word I learned. Language. Language is essential to thought. Okay, so Arabic is an amazing language, and it is old. And every time that we look at ancient languages, and we could give some names, but you always find that the older the language is, the richer it is, the more poetic it is, the more beautiful it is. Okay, so then what was the nature of the people that spoke that language? They had intellect. They had virtue. They had good qualities. So maybe we should rethink about the old Stone Age again. And maybe we should just be honest that, look, we don't have much evidence about the people back then, so let's be careful in what we say. But this is not the way that things work, because people have objectives. People have ideologies. They have tendencies. So this is very important. You know, you take something like the Big Bang Theory. All of you have heard about the Big Bang Theory. It's like, what an ugly name for a beautiful theory. The Big Bang Theory is when astronomers, learning about the way that light shows up in telescopes, were able to see that this amazing universe around us is equidistant from a center and that the further out you go, the faster it goes. Faster than the speed of light. What does that mean? What does that mean about space and time? We could talk about that because, they're not really able to deal with that. Believe me, they're not. It's like, okay, didn't you reach the end of your rope? Haven't you now discovered something that you can't really swallow? And then they say that it all goes back to a tiny point, which wouldn't be as big as the point of a dot of my ink pen. And then it came from that. And of course, that had to be chaotic. Of course, that had to be random. No, that's not possible. Random is not possible. Nothing happens by chance. Not possible. Impossible. Yeah, maybe you met your friend today in the mall and you didn't expect to do that. It was a chance from your standpoint, but Allah willed it to be. Okay? So we call this Big Bang, like big explosion. No, I'm sorry. That's creation from nothing. What you saw here by very careful study is that Allah created this amazing universe as all ancient Jews and ancient Christians and Muslims believed, from nothing. Not from matter. He created matter from nothing, energy from nothing. He created it from nothing. Okay, and why do you call it a Big Bang? Why don't you call it the first note of the cosmic symphony? That would be better. Okay, and if you don't let me name it that way, then would you please use another name yourself? Let's be honest. So we can call it expansion theory of the universe. We could call it point theory of the universe, and that would be scientific, because now we're just talking about what we know. So this is one of the greatest challenges that we face today, because we live in a civilization that is very ideological. It's very ideological. And it wants to put the stamp of its ideology on everything, on the words we use, on the concepts we have, on the values we have. And this is one of the greatest challenges that you and I face. Of course, we are concerned with our children. We're concerned with drugs. We're concerned with these other problems, and we can't take our eye off the ball. We have to take care of those problems. We have to learn how to live successfully in this time. But at the same time, we have a scholarly obligation, because scholars bear an obligation that is enough to break anybody's back. And many of you are scholars, and some of you are not scholars. That means that you don't carry the same burden on your back. It's good for your back. Okay? But those of us who have knowledge, and many of you have great knowledge, I know that. We have a huge burden on our back, because we need to begin to articulate, how do we think? What are the words we use? How do we think about the past? And there are many things in the past that you will never find in the history books at all. Even good history books. For example, you know that there was a people called Thamud. And you know that they made houses in the mountains, actually sandstone mountains. And you know that they were in Al-Hijr. And Al-Hijr is today what is called Madain Salih. It's a city to the north of Medina. And they made similar houses to that in Petra. And they made similar houses to that in Al-Aqaba. And these people truly existed. And these people also wrote about themselves in a script that we think we can almost read. It's called Thamudic. And they call themselves Thamud. They call themselves Sharikat Thamud. And we get the word Saracen from that word. Saracen, which is a word that people used to use for Arabs. They would use Moor for Berbers. So we have the Saracens and the Moors in Spain. The Saracens were the Arabs, and the Moors were the Berbers. But the word Saracen actually comes from Thamud, from the Greeks. Very, very interesting. And Thamudic is also an amazing language. So why don't we study that a little bit better? Why don't we look at that in a little bit more depth? Why is that neglected in studies? And we have rock paintings in the Arabian desert, rock paintings of camels and of ostriches and of men and women and things like that, that if you found these rock paintings in the Sahara Desert, they would be said to be, 7,000 BC. Okay, that's a long time ago. And that is the beginning of the New Stone Age, according to the way that most people in history date it. That's a long time ago. And if you were to compare the rock paintings of the Sahara Desert with those that you can find in Arabia today, and they're all over the place, they will say, no, not 7,000 BC. Let's say 500. Like, give me a break, okay? Let's have a good deal. Let's have a good deal. I mean, like, if you don't want to give me the full 7,000, then why don't you give me 3,500? Okay, you don't want to go to 7,000 BC? I'll take 3,500. I'll settle for that. They won't do that. They won't give you 3,500. They won't give you 2,000. They won't give you 1,500. Why? Because if they do that, they have to rewrite all the books. Because all the books that are written right now, they will say that who developed writing? Phoenicians. When would that be? 1,200 BC. So if you date Thamudic, which is clearly related to Phoenician and to Ethiopic and to Hebrew and to other scripts and Greek and Latin, then you blew the boat out of the water. It means the Phoenicians did not develop writing, and other people did. And who were they? They were actually Thamud, that people we didn't believe in who are mentioned in the Quran. It's like this. They don't like to do things like that. Okay, so Thamudic is incredible. And one of the things you see with Thamudic also is how they develop their script from the rock paintings. And there is a brother in England, a Muslim brother of South Asian background, who wrote a very good study of that. That's the kind of things that some of us should be doing. One or two of us at least. Not everybody. You've got other things to do. We've got big business to do. We've got other fish to fry. But we've got to fry that fish too. And that's a big fish. And that's a fish that will feed a lot more people than you imagine. So we have a lot of work to do. That's a big challenge. Challenge and response. Challenge and response. And if we are able to meet these challenges, then in the way that people use our language, you make history. You make history. Of course, we always look at history in terms of the day of judgment. That whatever we do here, whatever we accomplish here, we want to be in the garden together. And, my sister and I were rivals. My sister's name was Irene. I was born a Christian. And Irene means peace, but she should have been named War. Because for me, she was war. She was older than I was. And she was very strong, but she always was on my case, and anyway, may Allah guide her. May Allah guide my brother and all my family. I got off the subject and lost my chain of thought. So why did I mention Irene, my sister? Big fish, big fish. forgive me for that. Forgive me for that. But I know there's something that I wanted to say there that I thought was important. But, we have a lot of work to do in any case. We'll come back to that. And one of the main things that we have to do is, we've got to learn, first of all, how to think correctly. And this is one of the reasons why Aqidah is extremely important for us. The creed, that we know that Allah exists. We know that Allah is one. We know that Allah is unlike anything in creation. We know that God has life, infinite knowledge, power, will, hearing, and seeing. We know that He has the most beautiful names. Okay, so how do we know that? How do we prove that? And this is very important because of the fact that when we teach this, we have different ways of teaching it. We have different approaches to it. Some Muslims say, I prefer to stick just with the texts. I will follow what the Quran says and just leave it at that. If I understand it, I understand it. If I don't understand it, I'll just leave it at that. And that is a safe way. That's a correct way. And there are others who will interpret it, but they interpret it very carefully, very cautiously. That's the way of Imam Abu Hanifa, may Allah be pleased with him, and his school. His Fiqh al-Akbar, which is a beautiful book, is an extremely careful type of theology that goes beyond just looking at the text, but it's very cautious about the way it does that. And his students who came after him, they were also very careful about that. And they are very careful always to honor the parameters of the law, of the Sharia. And then we have others of the school of Imam al-Ash'ari, may Allah be pleased with him, who used interpretation. In other words, they used intellection. And they used ta'wil, interpretation, so that they could speak about these realities to people who had studied philosophy and people who had studied metaphysics, because they're talking in a big world of big ideas. So they grappled with those ideas. The Maturidis also did that, by the way, although they do it in a slightly different way. But this kind of study is extremely important for us today. We have to do it really carefully. We have to do it really properly. But also we will see that when we do that, bi-idhnillahi ta'ala, and may Allah give us tawfiq, then we will be able to provide new language. We will be able to provide new paradigms, new cognitive frames, and something like the expansion theory of the universe, something like the point theory of the universe, which they call Big Bang, which is offensive to me. It's like we can actually tell you about what probably happened and what is probably happening. And we will do that on the basis of our understanding that nothing in creation is like Allah, because that has incredible implications. And we can talk about other things as well. And I will end now. I'm sorry if I took too long, because I want you to ask questions. And I think we come back, right? We're going to have Dhuhr and we come back. So maybe we can have discussion. But, it is very important for us to do these things right, bi-idhnillahi ta'ala, and to meet these challenges, bi-idhnillahi ta'ala. And we will talk about things, we do talk about things in our tradition, for example, like how do you prove God exists? Well, which proof would you like to have? Would you like to have chicken? Would you like to have sheep? Would you have like goat? Would you like to have beef? Would you like to have camel? Would you like to have fish? Would you like to look at ontology, how existence works? Because we have proofs. Would you like to look at cosmology, which is profound causality? Profound causality. That what really causes this world to exist? How can that be? Or would you like to look at beauty? Because beauty in sound and form and color and mountains and sea is also a proof of God. And how do we do that? Well, let's work at it. Let me show you. Or do you want to look at teleology? Teleology, like purpose. That everything in this world is created for a purpose. How far is the sun from the earth? That's a long distance. What if it were just a few million miles closer? What if it were just a few million miles further? What if it were just a few thousand? Wouldn't that destroy life on earth the way we know it? It's a perfect balance. Everything about us, the human eye, the way the human eye is created, the human brain. You have more brain cells in your blessed brain than there are stars in heaven. How many stars are in heaven? The cells in your brain are stars. And you have more stars in your brain than there are in heaven. And how many of them do you use? Most of them don't. Most of us don't use many. That's amazing. That's amazing. That's also teleology. And that's also because this brain was created for great things. It was created for amazing things. Or do you want to look at justice and oppression? Because that's also a proof of God. Imam al-Maturidi, may Allah be pleased with him, he uses evil as one of the proofs of the existence of God. Why would he do a thing like that? Because Imam al-Maturidi lived in Samarkand. Did any of you come from Samarkand? I've been there. Beautiful city in Central Asia. And in Samarkand, they had Magians and Zoroastrians and Buddhists. But they had Magians who believed that good and evil were almost like gods. They were divine principles that warred against each other. So al-Maturidi says, no, I'm going to turn that I'm going to turn that around for you. I'm going to show how that works. These cannot be divine. They are created and they are proofs of the existence of Allah. See, so this is one of the benefits you get from Maturidi. And there are other things to look at as well, like common consensus. Most Americans believe in God. That to me is a good sign. Most people in this country believe in God. Some people say as many as 80%. To me, that's good news. That's really good news. But most human beings do believe in God. And the greatest human beings believe in God. Isaac Newton, did he believe in God? Absolutely. He spent more time working on theology than he did physics. But Newton couldn't tell you much about what he believed because he believed that God is one. And he didn't believe in the Trinity. And Joseph Priestley was like that, the father of chemistry. And there are many other examples as well. So we could also look at that many of the greatest people, Blaise Pascal, who's very famous in the history of chemistry and of geometry and other things, he was an atheist. And then one night he had a dream. And in the dream he was taken into hell. And he was shown things that he could not bear. And he wrote a note that he kept in his coat for the rest of his life. Fire, fire, fire. I believe in the God of the prophets, not the God of the philosophers. Okay, most people believe in God. When I was in Ann Arbor, I taught at the University of Michigan from 1978 to 1982, 4 blessed years, beautiful years. I always come home when I come back to Michigan. But there was a woman, and I'll end with this because we have to pray Dhuhr. But there was a woman who lived near us. We lived in student housing. I was a new professor. I was broke. And my wife, may Allah bless her, she was a student at the University of Michigan. And so we lived in Northwood 5. We lived in student housing. And around us there were beautiful brothers and sisters, Muslim brothers and sisters, like, for example, Imam Dawood Tawhidi, may Allah have mercy on him. And I saw his son today and was really honored to meet his son. But we had Dawood Tawhidi, we had a number of people, and we really had Ihsan Bagbi, there was a woman who didn't live very far from us, and she was divorced, and she was a single mother, and she had a little boy who was a troublemaker, and he was maybe 3 or 2.5. And one day, this is amazing, she was an atheist, and she was a feminism before feminism really got off the ground. And she had a tongue, and you had to make sure that she didn't cut you apart with her tongue. And she was given the gift of argumentation. The Prophet said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, "Ma dalla qawmin ba'da hudan kanu alayhi illa utul jadal." He says that no people goes astray after having been on a guidance that they lived, that they were upon, but that they are given argumentation. They fight and fight and fight. They argue and argue. That's why may Allah remove that curse from us, because a lot of times the people who need the help the most are the ones who are the most argumentative, and they are the ones who know it all. It's like, you're down and out. You're in trouble. And yet they won't listen to anybody. So that's not a good sign. We ask Allah to remove from them that, but a lot of times they live in a nightmare world. They're very unhappy. And they're unhappy with themselves, and they're unhappy with the people around them. Because she was like that. So that shows that she's really not on the path of guidance. Because she argues all the time. Argues about everything. One day we were outside. It was a spring day. And we were talking. And we were in a place where the cars were all, we had a park. And the cars were parked on the road. And she was arguing with us. You can't get in a word edgewise. And her little boy was playing, and then he got further away. We're not paying attention to him. And then he got between the cars. And then she saw him. But when she saw him, another car is speeding down the road in his direction, and he's just about to go in front of that car. And she stopped. She said, "Oh my God." Like that. "Oh my God." That's what she said, like that. And the car screeched. It put on its brakes. The dust came up. And the little boy escaped by an inch and came crying back to his mother. Because the muttar, the person in desperate need, if they will call upon God, He will not turn them down. And she called upon God don't take my child. This is all I've got. All the beauty of my life has been taken away. My husband divorced me. My husband abused me. My husband left me. All I've got is this little boy. And so then what came out of her heart, the secret she didn't want to tell you, and she didn't want to tell you herself, that actually I believe in God. Because that's innate in us. That's innate in us. And then in that spirit, she said, "Oh my God." And God delivered her son. The next day, she was back at her arguments. But we'll end right here. But when we talk about proofs of Allah, and that's a beautiful discourse, it will open our eyes. But we don't do that so much to prove that God exists. But we do that to restore our hearts, to restore our minds, and to give us the right mind. That's what the proofs do, because you know it already in your heart anyway. You know that Allah exists. You know that God exists. You know that God is one. You know that there is a garden and a fire. The knowledge you have in your heart, you cannot measure. So the proofs of Allah, they actually work on the innate knowledge that we have. And they enable us by that to restore the heart, to get it sound again. Let's stop here. We'll come back after Salat. Allahumma ma mananta bihi alayna fatammimhu wa ma an'amta bihi fala taslubhu wa ma alimtahu faghfirhu wa ma satartahu fala tahtikhu tamam ni'matika wa dawam afiyatik ya hayyu ya qayyum bi rahmatika nastaghith أصلح لنا شؤوننا كلها ولا تكلنا إلى أنفسنا ولا إلى أحد من خلقك طرفة عين ولا أقل من ذلك وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم.
The first question that was from the audience is, why is studying theology important? And how does the study of theology or lack thereof relate to a crisis of faith or a rise in atheism that we see amongst the Muslim community?
Very good question. Excellent question. Why is theology important? Why is it important to study theology? Does that maybe our not studying theology very much reflect itself in the crisis of our community? Well, that's a really good question. In answering that question as a beginning, I would like to say that theology, like other types of knowledge in Islam, has different parts to it. In Islam, we always have things that everyone is required to believe or do or not do. Those are the foundations. And those are the things that are absolutely clear in the Quran and the Sunnah. So when we talk about theology, you have theology which is just basic aqeedah. It is basic creed. And that is relatively straightforward and relatively simple. But it is the first obligation of every Muslim to learn it. And it's very, very important. And it should not be taught in a superficial way. It should be taught in a sufficiently sound way. Then you have theology, which is the attempt to understand complexities about God, the prophets, and the hereafter. And that type of theology is based on the foundations. It's got to be based on the foundations. But it has in it insights and truths that are not required of people and may not even be easy for all people to understand and may not even seem relevant to some people. So that is not required of every individual, but it is required of the community. And anything like that that is required of the community, we call it fard kifaya, community obligation, societal obligation. Then there must be an adequate number of men and women of knowledge who are good at that, who know it really well. Okay, so that's the first thing, that there is a basic creed that we all are required to learn. And it's very simple and very straightforward. Okay, that is regarded as the first obligation of Islam. And that means to say it's the most important obligation of Islam. Many of us learn to pray when we're 7 years old. Or we learn to make wudu when we're 7 years old, maybe even earlier. And that's before we're required to know theology. And we don't wait to pray until we learn basic creed. But basic creed is very important. And it should be done sufficiently well. Okay, so this brings up another aspect of theology, and that is that many believers, many men and women, maybe the vast majority of them, their belief in God is intuitive. They just know it's true. They don't have any doubt about it. It's in your heart, after all. And they live in societies that believe in God and that believe in good. And then they have dreams. They see things. Okay, so they know this is true. And that basic fitri, or intuitive type of faith, is enough if it's all you need. And so this brings up also the second part of the question, and that is that we have a lot of problems in our community today. And we have a lot of young people and older people who are leaving the religion. That's not good. That's not good at all. We have people who you would expect never to leave the religion. They might have been even prominent in our communities. They might have studied even in places where you would think that, like, how could he ever disbelieve? And yet something happens to him or her, and they get turned away. That's bad news. That's very bad news. One of my best friends, that happened to him. That happened to him. And I'm praying that he'll come back soon. He brought many people to Islam. But then something happened to him and he turned his back. And you could say, well, maybe he didn't believe in the first place. Well, I don't think that's true. I think he did. Maybe he didn't have the profoundest faith. Maybe there were a lot of things he didn't understand. But he was a believer, and he's a beautiful brother. So we have a lot of that happening right now. And, one of the things that we must remember, too, is that if we look at our children, or let's say our young people, and we compare our young people to the young people among the Christians and the Jews and other communities in the United States, our children are the most unhappy. Our children are the most confused about their religion. Our children are filled with anger that sometimes relates to Islam more than anybody else. That is not good news. That is not good news. Now, why is that the case? Well, it's a complex issue. It has a lot to do with 9/11, because a lot of these young people grew up after 9/11. So all they saw, all they heard were things that really, like, we're not like that, but are we really not like that? And why one thing after another? Okay, that is a huge burden to bear. And that's affecting our children. And we can't be ignorant of that. Don't take people for granted. Don't take people for granted. MashaAllah, you're a strong believer. Some of you are what we could call spiritual athletes. You know how people can run 50 miles? You can do that spiritually. You're strong. Okay, but don't expect your brothers and sisters to keep up with you. They're not that way. And we have to really give them what they need. We have to teach the teaching. We have to help them. Okay, and we have got to show the world what this religion is. That's very important to do that. That's a big challenge we face. That's a hard challenge. There are people, there are interest groups that do not want us to succeed in this country. If we were to succeed in this country, we would turn it into the most beautiful land on the face of the earth. God's country. God's country. Beautiful, free, just. We can do all those things. Islam is a civilization giver. It is a protector of people. It is a protector of the weak. It is a protector of minorities. It is the traditional protector of the Jews and the Christians. Even when Jews and Christians were at danger from Jews and Christians. Who kept the keys in Jerusalem to the Holy Sepulchre? Muslim family. Why did they keep it? Because the Christians knew if you give it to any Christian group, they won't give it to the other groups. But they know if you give it to the Muslim, he will give it to everybody. He'll let everybody in the Holy Sepulchre. Okay, that's the kind of people we are. We are protectors of people. We are supposed to be protectors of people. We are supposed to be dignified people. Okay, so we have a lot of problems today, but theology is part of that. That this is a time, if you have intuitive faith, and most of us have intuitive faith, you may never need more than that, but there's a danger with intuitive faith. And that is that sometimes intuitive faith means that you better not be asked any serious questions. Because maybe people, like, you believe in this, but then people come, but did you ever think about this? Did you ever think about this? Does this make sense? And you say, well, I never did think about that. And then maybe you say, and I don't believe that's true, but like, you know, intuitive faith often has to be sheltered. And sometimes people who have intuitive faith, they shelter themselves by cutting themselves off from the world. And that's not good for the community. It might be all they need, but it's not good for the community. So theology is an extremely important part of our religion. And the sophisticated study of theology enables you to answer every issue. It enables you to talk about quantum mechanics and atomic theory, Big Bang, the beginning of the world, evolutionism, anything. Okay? It enables us to talk about values, ethics, morality. It enables us to do incredible things. In fact, it enables us to do physics and to do chemistry. Physics and chemistry and other sciences, astronomy, have come to limits by the incredible discoveries they have made that they don't know how to go beyond because their cognitive frames don't work. Their cognitive frames are too superficial. When you live in an empirical world is a world where you only believe that what you can see, hear, touch, taste, and smell is real. Well, that's a big thing in modern science. When you have an empirical view of reality, then you will be systematically superficial. You will not be able to go deep on anything. And the way that physics and chemistry and other sciences have developed in this age, systematic superficiality will not work anymore. A lot of people who've won Nobel Prizes in atomic physics, for example, got their ideas from Buddhism, from the Buddhist worldview. Okay, but we can provide incredible things. In our theology, we could even have theologians who would tell you about the different stages of existence. And you don't have to learn that, and you may not be interested in that, and that might not even be of great value to our community. But if you're in physics, it's like, I think I'd like to hear about that. String theory, we can do a lot better than that. We have deep thinkers in Islamic history. And for us, truth is not something reason produces. Truth exists, and reason perceives it. Do you have other questions? Yes? So your question then is about, like I talked about physics and chemistry and astronomy, and so you're saying, what about anthropology, sociology? Is that what you're asking? I didn't hear the first part. Okay. Okay, so this is a very good question. Muslims, you know, the prophets, the messengers and the prophets, they gave us everything. Where did people learn to hunt? Where did people learn to farm? Where did people learn to build? Where did people learn? Okay, so this question then is about, I think we can say, how theology would be relevant to things like anthropology and sociology, and how they would be relevant to it. Okay? Mm-hmm. 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 So as the Islamic civilization spread, it took the knowledge of the Persians, the rabbis, the Hindus, the Chinese, many, many people. It took knowledge wherever it could find it. So that's a very good question. And we're talking about, for example, we spoke just now about the fact that our theology has a certain relevance to astronomy or physics or chemistry. So the brother is saying, well, what about something like anthropology or sociology, psychology, social psychology? And do they also have relevance to us? Right? Back and forth. Especially in the post-Enlightenment period, which is like the modern period, okay? The 1900s, the 1800s, the 1900s, and this century. So that's a very good question. You know, the prophets give us all that we know. And they gave us the gift of writing. And this is what we believe, because we believe that all beneficial knowledge comes to us through prophecy. Rational medicine, things like that, very beneficial things. And the scholars, the men and women of knowledge, they are the heirs of the prophets. They are the heirs of the prophets because they must master that knowledge and they must practice that knowledge. And they must teach that knowledge. So Islamic civilization is really a miracle. It's an absolute miracle that these blessed people who came out of the Arabian Peninsula, and I love the Arabian Peninsula, as many of you do too, the land of Mecca and Medina. And I lived there for many years, and I loved it. Mecca and Medina, the mountains, it's so beautiful there. It's really beautiful, really beautiful. And, you know, so it came out of that environment, and then it inherits the world. And it builds out of this an incredible edifice of civilization and knowledge. And one of the greatest accomplishments of Islam in its history was what we can call the rooting of knowledge. The rooting of knowledge. In other words, that the Muslims inherited prophetic knowledge, the Quran and the Sunnah. They inherited also from their Arab past certain knowledge about veterinary medicine, especially how to take care of horses. Horses were extremely important for them. They inherited also certain knowledge about history and medicine. Okay, and then they received all this other knowledge. And they were able to take it and put it together. And we call that rooting knowledge. And how did they do that? This is very interesting. And there are great studies that have been done of this. Unfortunately, one of the greatest studies is not in English, it's in German. It's by a great Turkish scholar who writes in German. His name is Fuad Sezgin. He's fantastic. Okay, and he shows you how all of these sciences develop. Veterinary medicine, botany, agriculture, architecture, everything. Mathematics, geometry, the Islamic sciences before that. And that's really valuable. And you see that this, first of all, it was a long period. It wasn't something that happened overnight. This took time. Usually it took over 200 years. Sometimes it went fast because there were certain types of knowledge, like agriculture, that Muslims were extremely interested in. And the rise of Islam led to one of the greatest agricultural revolutions in the history of humankind. That Muslims learned water, hydrology, how to use water, how to keep water pure, how to turn the desert into a garden. You know, we produced incredible agricultural production. Okay, this was one of our main concerns. And we were very good at it, really. Gardening, botany, zoology. These things develop really fast. Medicine also. Medicine was very important to us, and our medicine develops and develops and develops. Mathematics is something that we're famous for. Algebra, as you know, comes from the Arabic al-jabr. We still call our numbers Arabic numbers because we got these numbers, exactly the numbers we use here, from Muslim Spain. And they wrote 1, 2, 3, 4 in numbers almost like these on the clock. In the Muslim world, we have two types of Arabic numbers. We have the ones in the East, which are often called Indian numbers. And we have the ones in the West, which are those ones on our clock, which are called Arab numerals, Arabic numerals. And if you go to the West in the Muslim world, you'll see they use those numbers. They don't use the ones you use in India and Pakistan, or in Syria or Egypt. Okay? But the number system is a huge development. And it is a prime example of rooting knowledge, that Muslims got the knowledge of numbers, they got the knowledge of mathematics and geometry and many other things from all kinds of sources. They got them from Persia, from India, from the Greeks, from the rabbis, from all kinds of people. And they worked on them. To synthesize mathematics the way that Muslims did took longer than anything else. It takes almost 100 years longer than anything else. And then you have these incredible people, the Musa brothers, the three Musa brothers. You have Al-Khawarizmi and others who then get it. And they begin to produce incredible mathematics, incredible mathematics. And so this is a great thing. Islam did that in the past. And I believe that this is one of the most important obligations that this community has, that we have. We've got to create institutions. We're creating institutions. This is an institution. But we've got to create academic institutions that are number one, that are the equal of the University of Michigan or Chicago or Harvard or Yale or Oxford or Cambridge or Sorbonne or anything else. And we can do that with people like you. We can definitely do that with people like you. We have in this community and many places Muslim valedictorians in high school and college who mastered 3 disciplines. I can name some names if you wanted. They would be embarrassed, but I could name some names. We have some really talented people in this community, but we have to develop institutions of learning that produce scholars, that produce scholarship, that attain scholarship and produce it. And we have to root all the knowledges that we use today: language, psychology, sociology, anthropology, physics, chemistry, law, everything. What do we mean by that? We mean by that we discover the principles of theology and law, because law is also truth-based in our belief, that can be the foundation and should be the foundation and is the foundation of the truth of these disciplines. We believe that truth is one. Okay, so then we try to give them all a common language, a common denominator, and we try to humanize them that way. This is really, really important. This is something that I really love, and I hope and pray that we can work together and live long enough that we can do things like this. This is really great stuff. And this, if we could accomplish this, then you see what comes out of it. You see what comes out of that. So things like anthropology, how would you root it? You find what it's actually doing, what the conceptions are, how we value those conceptions. We root them. We look at the language also, and then also we do benefit from them in return. But if we root it, the benefit we get will be 100 times more. If I studied anthropology now, I'll get a lot of benefit. I've done that in the past. I've studied anthropology, especially cultural anthropology, to try to learn about the way that the society of the Prophet ﷺ worked. Because you have cultural anthropologists who do things like that. How do societies like that work, that are not based on government or administration? They can give you lots of insight. So we can benefit from them. They can benefit from us. Our tradition is an amazing thing. And what is our tradition? That's a huge topic. But one of the things, however you define our tradition, that some people would agree, many people would agree, I hope. I know certain people who would. They would agree that however you define our tradition, that we will have to say that our tradition is such that any man or woman of good mind and body who's capable to be a scholar, and there are many men and women who are, and they have an obligation to get scholarship, by the way. In Islamic law, scholarship is not just for men. In Islamic law, it is a societal fard kifaya of men and women to master Islamic sciences. Not just for men. Okay, that is very clear in Islamic law. That is very clear in Islamic law. So, the rooting of knowledge is that when we do that, then it means that a man or woman who has the capacity, as many of you do, and the training, and may we be able to get that, institutions that can train, and who have the time and a relatively large life. May Allah give us long lives and good health. Okay? Can master the whole thing from A to Z. And do we have examples of that in Islamic history? Whew, we've got thousands of examples of that. The people that would be called in English polymaths, meaning they mastered everything. Ibn Taymiyyah is an example of that. Al-Razi is an example of that. Imam al-Qarafi is an example of that. You can go on. It's like al-Qarafi, it's like he knew everything that you could know in his time. He used to make water clocks as a hobby. When he would write about Islamic law, he would use algebra and other things like that to solve inheritance problems. When he would talk about finding the Qibla, he uses astronomy. He's incredible, Al-Qarafi. Absolutely everything that was known in his time, he mastered. When I was at the University of Michigan, I was invited to go to Tunisia. I had the honor there to meet Sheikh al-Shadhili al-Nayfar, who is one of the greatest scholars I ever knew. And we remained friends until the day he died. He was a beautiful man, beautiful man. He was the king of the ulama of Tunisia. And Tunisians are great people. And Tunisian scholarship is incredible scholarship. And I went to his house in Tunis. Beautiful house, old Tunisian house with Andalusian flavor because he was an Andalusian. His family came from the north of Spain. They still had the keys to their house, that was taken away from them. And he had books everywhere, manuscripts everywhere. And I was amazed. And he said, I said, you've got books everywhere. And he said, even in the kitchen? And he took me into his kitchen, and he had manuscripts in his kitchen. And my belief in Shadhili and Nayfar, may Allah have mercy upon him, was that he was a master of everything that was there. How? How is that possible? Was he able to read all of that? I don't think that's possible. How? Because knowledge is rooted. And all of that knowledge in his mind was rooted. It has usul, whether it's mathematics, whether it's astronomy, whether it is hadith or Quran, history, whatever it may be. And that means that every knowledge has a door and a vestibule, an entrance from that door. How many of you have read the Ajurumiyya in Arabic grammar? The Ajurumiyya. We taught it in Spain in 1982, 83. The Ajurumiyya, our published edition of it, was in big letters because the people were new Muslims. And it was 15 pages. 15 pages with all of the basic grammar of the Arabic language. And if you go to Spain today, you go there and meet some of our brothers and sisters, some of them studied with me. And when you meet them, say, Al-kalamu huwa al-lafz al-murakkab al-mufidu bil-wada' wa aqsamuhu thalatha. That's how the Ajurumiyya begins. Speech. Al-kalamu huwa al-lafz al-murakkab al-mufidu bil-wada'. They all, because we made them memorize it. So they all memorized that. And they still remember it to this day. They didn't forget it. But the Ajurumiyya is a key. It's a key to the root. It's a key to the cellar, to the foundations. One of the greatest books in Islamic history is Kitab Sibawayh, which is one of the most brilliant works in grammar and sarf, morphology, that was ever written. It's hard. It's difficult. You want to make it easy? Start with the Ajurumiyya. Start with the Ajurumiyya, and inshallah, you will find that Sibawayh is not so hard anymore. So this is the great thing. And so this is rooting knowledge. Rooting knowledge puts it on foundations. You make the foundations accessible. And then people can get knowledge. Scholars can get knowledge of everything. They like to do that if they can. They like to do that. You know, one of the greatest scholars in Islamic history is Fatima ibn Muhammad al-Halabiyya. How many of you know her? Fatima bint Muhammad al-Halabiyya, whose husband was al-Kashani. You know Kashani if you're Hanafis. He is the author of Bada'i' as-Sana'i'. That was his dowry. That was his dowry to marry, to take the hand of Fatima. And Fatima was a greater scholar than Kashani, and her father was one of the masters of the Hanafi school. And she was asked, kings wanted to marry her because she was also beautiful. We're told that she was the most beautiful woman of her time. I don't know how you would know that, but she was very beautiful. And kings wanted to marry her. Princes wanted to marry her. She said, no. But when Kashani wrote his commentary on her father's book, which is called, and the commentary is called Bada'i' as-Sana'i', then that's the dowry. You can marry me. And Al-Kashani would never give a fatwa unless her father signed it first, she signed it second, and then he would sign it. And then when her father died, he wouldn't give a fatwa unless she signed it first. And when she died, nothing to live for. She was a great woman. And she was the counselor of whom? Nuruddin Zengi and Salah ad-Din. Fatima. We have great women in our history, but these great men and women, they can master it all, not because they can get all that information. That's not possible. They get the roots. They get the roots. So this is what we have to do today. We live in a time when the more we learn, the less we know. That's not good. That's not good, you know. Our libraries are so big, and our libraries now are small, because what's available on the internet is 10 times, 100 times bigger than that. What are we going to do with all that information? The more we learn, the less we know. We've got to specialize. Yeah, but where's the human dimension? And if we don't have a human dimension on this knowledge, where will it take us? And will it be beneficial? Or will it be harmful? That's why you have to root knowledge. Once you root knowledge, then all of that knowledge, as vast as it may be, it becomes human in size. And that means also that we can use it. I believe in Islam, and I also believe in Islamic civilization. You're not required to do that. But Islamic civilization to me is just like it'll break your heart. If you know what we achieved in Cairo or Damascus or Bukhara, you know, or Spain or Portugal, then it's like, this was destroyed. I don't think I can bear that. I don't think I can bear that. It's really hard to bear. And why? Why was this destroyed? What was the reason for that? You know, we are strong people. We survived genocide time after again and the destruction of whole civilizations. And we keep going. We keep going. But Islamic civilization has a great power, and it's not dead, bi'ithnillahi ta'ala. And there are scholars that would say, there's a Frenchman, his name is Jacques Ellul, E-L-U-L, Ellul. And Jacques Ellul wrote, this is many years ago, he believed that Islamic civilization in Spain and Portugal reached the highest limit, the highest possible peak. No, that can't be. No, he said, no, I believe that, truly. Because he said he knew that. He knew what they had. He said they could have produced anything that Europe would produce over the next hundreds of years. But they didn't do it. They didn't need to do it. And he says also that they didn't want to do it because their civilization was balanced. Their civilization was based on honoring nature and protecting nature and water and animals and living in a way that is sustainable. And that's what he says, they wouldn't open the door to a type of civilization that would become like industrial Europe, which will be more powerful and more destructive, but it won't be sustainable. And it will turn ugly the things that were beautiful. That might be romantic. I was attracted to it very much because I believed in Islamic civilization. And that's not a religious belief, that's a historical belief. But I believe in that more now than I did then, because I know more about Muslim Spain and Portugal now than I knew then. And this would have been true of other parts of the Muslim world as well. So we don't cry over the past, and we don't want to romanticize the past. But what we ask Allah to give us is the gift to do this deen, to live this deen, to root knowledge. And not just in theology, not just in law, not just in hadith, not just in Quran, in anthropology, sociology, law, psychology, social psychology. Anthropologists and sociologists don't speak the same language. Different schools of sociology and anthropology don't speak the same language. Dr. Jackson, who is one of the gifts to Michigan that Allah has given, and he's a brilliant human being and a great human being, and I learn a lot from him. I study him like a student would study, especially his words. The man has incredible ability to articulate and express. What was I going to say? I lost my chain of thought. Got carried away with Dr. Jackson. Yeah. So Dr. Jackson has written these incredible books about black theology, black suffering. He's written about the third resurrection. He has written about other things like that. And we had people, Rami Nashashibi in Chicago, who is another amazing person, who tried to get the Department of Sociology at the University of Chicago. They like him. He's one of their students. He got a PhD from them to study some of Dr. Jackson's books. They wouldn't do it because he's not a sociologist. He doesn't use their language. Okay, so then what is the value of your sociology? Historians don't study sociology usually. Sociologists don't study history. They don't use the same methodology. They don't use the same language. We as Muslims don't feel comfortable with that because we believe that the truth is one. And, in the past, one of the greatest things that we achieved was the ability to take all of this knowledge and make it bloom and make it accessible to human beings. And that is necessary in civilization so that the thing stays balanced. We as human beings have to understand what we know. We have to understand its implications. Any other questions? Yes. Do you have a question? You don't have a question? Okay. So the question is about Imam al-Ghazali, may Allah be pleased with him, and his attitude towards logic and philosophy. And I have to be very honest with you that I am not qualified to answer your question. The attitudes that people like al-Ghazali and Ibn Taymiyyah and others had about logic is something that I've never studied. If Sheikh Hamza Yusuf were here, he could answer your question really well. Unfortunately, I could only stab in the dark. Imam al-Ghazali, however, is one of the great revivers of the religion. He is one of the great teachers of the Ummah. And everything that he does has to be understood in those terms. And he is very similar to his young contemporary, who was Sheikh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani. So these two men are contemporaries. When al-Ghazali leaves his teaching, and he leaves Baghdad, and he goes out to discover spiritual truth, at the same time, a 17-year-old youth who was a Sharif of Ahlul Bayt comes into Baghdad, and that was Sheikh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani. They didn't call him Sheikh then, they called him a student. And so these two people will work very closely together. Imam al-Ghazali is several years older than Sheikh Abdul Qadir, maybe 18, 19 years. And Imam al-Ghazali will not be gifted with a long life. Sheikh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani will have a much longer life. But many of the things that Sheikh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani will do are based on al-Ghazali's program. That how do we bring this religion back to life? How do we put Muslims on the path of the hereafter so that they are living this religion in a way that is pleasing to Allah, and so that they are doing what they're supposed to do? And out of this will come Salah ad-Din, Nuruddin, incredible changes. They would have regarded themselves to be followers of al-Ghazali and followers of Sheikh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani. He was their teacher. He taught Salah ad-Din when he was just a boy. He took the hand of Salah ad-Din when he was just a little boy. Even he told Salah ad-Din, you will conquer Egypt. But the first time, you will be defeated. Then the second time, you will take it. That's exactly what happened in history. So these are great people. And one of the things we have to say about Imam al-Ghazali, and this is the reason why I can't answer your question, is that he is very subtle in what he does. So what he does always has a certain intent. Imam al-Ghazali is a master of the Sharia. He's a master of the law. And he always stays in the law. In his Ihya Ulumuddin, he just wants us to believe in Islam, to live in Islam, and to do what we're and to live Islam in a way that will take us to the garden and protect us from the fire and enable us also to live this religion the way that it ought to be. But Imam al-Ghazali, the way he does that is absolutely amazing. So that's all I can say in answer to your good question. If you ask Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, he will give you the answer you want, inshallah.
Dr. Umar, this is a question from the sisters' side. What are some books you may recommend on world history and Islamic history?
What are some books that I would recommend on world history and Islamic history? Well, this is usually how I answer that question. And when people ask me that question, I usually send them to a book by Ira Lapidus, Lapidus, Ira, I-R-A, which is called A History of Muslim Societies. And it's a beginning book. It's fairly large, and in my opinion, it's pretty good. It's not going to give you everything. It's not going to answer all your problems, but that's a pretty good beginning. To be honest, we have to write our own histories. We have to do that. That's a big task. And there are things in our history that you probably never imagined. Switzerland, for example. You know where Switzerland is, right? That beautiful little country where my grandfathers come from, in the mountains between Italy and Germany. Switzerland. Did you know that Muslims were in Switzerland in force for 150 years? Very interesting. How did they get there? Caliphate of Cordoba. The Caliphate of Cordoba. What? And what would they be interested in doing in Switzerland? Oh, they were smart people. And how did they do it? Sea power. Because Spain is always a sea power. Portugal is always a sea power. But the Muslims in Spain and Portugal, they controlled the Atlantic and the Mediterranean. And they built incredible ships. They built incredible ships. And why did they build such incredible ships? There were also ships of war. Vikings. The Vikings. So, and why did the Vikings even appear in history? Muslim Spain and Portugal. Because Muslim Spain and Portugal became so wealthy that they dried up the wealth of Northern Europe. This is pretty well proven in economic history. And countries like what is today Denmark and Norway and Sweden and England and Northern Germany and Holland, they became poor because nobody would go there anymore. It's like there's no profit. Merchants are always looking for profit. The merchants that are in Italy and France and elsewhere, they no longer want to go north. Because what do you get there? Sheepskin, flax, wood. You go to Spain and Portugal, all you have to do is pay jizya. You pay the jizya and you're protected by the state. And then you get gold and silver and silk and oranges and lemons and everything in the world. It's really amazing. This is true. And I could even tell you, because you had people at the University of Michigan who were the masters of this. I don't know if the one in particular is still alive. His name is Ehrenkreuz. Is he still alive? You know, Professor Ehrenkreuz. He was one of my companions. He was the person who worked on this. Okay, so this meant the Vikings have to come out. And the Vikings, you probably have seen movies about Vikings. Those are usually exaggerated. But the Vikings come out. Where did the Vikings first go? Lisbon, Portugal. Great Muslim city. Great Muslim city. And they sack it because Lisbon had never been protected from the Atlantic because of the fact they didn't have any enemies on the Atlantic. And they sacked Lisbon, and they took out of it tons of goods and women and children as well. And then they come down to attack Seville. These are all Muslim cities, Muslim ports. And the caliph at that time, his name was Abdurrahman III. He said, he was building the Mosque of Cordoba. And he said, I won't put a brick on another brick until we get rid of these fire worshippers. He called them fire worshippers. He also called them Normans, Northmen, Norman. They called them Northmen. They called themselves Northmen as well. He said, I won't do, he said, stop the mosque. He said, we will fight these people. We will defeat these people. We'll teach them a lesson. You don't do this to our cities. You want to trade with us? That's one thing. But you want to do this? No, we will teach you a lesson. And the great Maliki scholar of Cordoba at that time, who's one of our famous teachers, Ibn al-Habib, he said, you are the Khalifa. You know, he didn't say you can chew gum and walk at the same time. They didn't chew gum then. But he said that, you know, you can still build the mosque and you can still take care of the Vikings. And they declared jihad. And in 100 days, the Vikings were finished. Finished. And they were punished. And many of the Vikings became Muslims. And they were settled in Spain in a city that I visited called Jerez de la Frontera. Jerez de la Frontera, which we called in Arabic Sheresh. And it always remained a Scandinavian Muslim city. And there were Vikings in Denmark as well. And ambassadors went to Denmark to see who are these Vikings and how do they fight. Because they have these really fast ships that they use to attack. But what do they do with the women and children? Because they take lots of women and lots of children. We have to ransom them. In Islamic law, you must ransom the prisoner. All the women and children they've taken off to Denmark, we've got to get them back. This is also why the ambassador is going. We'll pay you gold. We'll get them back. But give back our children. Give back our women. Okay, so they go there. But also they go there to learn who are these people and how do they fight. And one of the things they learn is that they have war boats. That's what you see in the movies, right? But they have barges. And the barges are where they put the women and children. The barges are where they put the gold and silver. Okay, so this means that they are actually not so, that they have vulnerability because the barges don't move very fast. And that means that they have to always protect their barges at sea. And so they say, then this is the way we'll deal with the Vikings. We will build ships that are as fast as their ships. And our ships will have cannons on the front, which they call nefata. Nefata means naphthalene cannons. They're cannons that use gassy oil. And you put fire to it and it explodes and it shoots out a ball of fire. And it will burn up their ships. And then on the back, we will have archers with crossbows and with regular bows. And if you want to look at, you've seen how samurais have made swords? Samurai sword is incredible. We made swords that would have competed with that. We made arrows. We were really good at what we did. So they say, we'll have our archers and they will have so many arrows that they can fight for a whole week without stopping. And then we'll have boarding areas because we're going to conquer the Vikings at sea. We're not going to just drive them off. And then peace was made with the Vikings for about 16 years. The old king died. Many Vikings became Muslims during that time. The old king died. The new king said, the old king made the treaty. I didn't make the treaty. I don't agree. And so he came back, to maybe attack Lisbon and Seville, or other cities. There are lots of cities in Spain and Portugal. But also, they said, set up towers along the whole coast. And you can go there. I'd love to take you there. The whole Portuguese coast still has those towers. And the Spanish coast also has a lot of those towers. But they were really needed in the Portuguese coast. And these towers are so close to each other that they can send smoke signals, light signals, mirror signals. And they have a whole code to communicate. And then any time a Viking ship appears, you send the signals out, whether it is day or night, and we go out and get them on the sea. You've got to fight them on the sea. You cannot let them attack you on land. And so the Vikings come back. The first time when they attacked Lisbon, they had like 50 ships. The second time, they had almost 70. 70 warriors. 70 ships of warriors, of Viking warriors. And the Muslims attacked them at sea. And they burned half the fleet. And they took all their barges. And the rest of the fleets escaped. And they went into the Mediterranean. They attacked Morocco, Nadur. They attacked other places. Okay? And that is one of the most important battles in history. You remember that when you studied it in school. You never heard about that, did you? But that is one of the most important battles in human history. And then those ships they will then take to Majorca. All of the islands of the Mediterranean were Muslim islands. All of the islands of the Mediterranean embraced Islam even before Spain and Portugal. Majorca, Menorca, Ibiza. Have you ever been to Ibiza? Ibiza. What word is Ibiza from? It's from Arabic. Yabisa. Dry island. Yabisa. Ibiza. And then they establish ships in Majorca, and on that basis they go up to Switzerland from the Rhone River. Very, very interesting. Very interesting. We have got to write history. We've got to write history. We gave a lesson in Detroit, on African roots in America, African Muslim roots in America, and also pre-Muslim roots in America. And that's not a dream, that's not an illusion, that's historical fact. But why didn't we study that in our history books? We've got to write our own history books, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. For world history, the great work of history is Arnold Toynbee, but he's hard to read. He's hard to read. He's beautiful, beautiful writer, but he's got so much history in his works that he's hard to read. If you wanted to read Toynbee, you really need some help, I would say. But also, you can use something like Encyclopedia Britannica. I don't know about Wikipedia. I'm not sure that I believe in that very strongly. But it can help you through this stuff, because you have to look up a lot of stuff, and you'll learn a lot of things. Sorry to take so long to answer a question. That's very impolite. Fudul al-kalam, superfluous speech. Wait. Okay.
Okay. This one is, Muslims have a great history, but now the Muslim world is too weak. What hope do you have for the current Muslim world?
MashaAllah. So the Muslim history is very great, right? What hopes do you have for the Muslim world? We have a difficult situation today. One of the great scholars of our time who writes about Islam is a man who's very friendly to us, and his name is Richard Bullitt. Richard Bullitt. When I met him, he was in New York at Columbia. He spells his name B-U-L-L-I-E-T, and he pronounced it Bullitt. He corrected me. He said, no, my name's not Boulier, it's Bullitt. And he's done a lot of good work. He has a book, by the way, Richard Bullitt, called The Case for Islamo-Christian Civilization. And I suggest that you read that book. Not very big, and it's not hard to read. and it will give you a lot of strength, because he wants to show that all this stuff said about Islam as the world's enemy and Huntington and things like that, he says it's complete nonsense. And he said, I cannot be quiet. He said, I'm a historian. I've got to talk about this. And so his book is very good. You should read it. A Case for Islamo-Christian Civilization. Very, very good book. But Bullitt studied also things like conversion. He studied things like conversion. He has the best studies of Muslim conversion. And they are also the most scientific. They're based on careful numerical evidence. And he shows, how did Islam spread? And how did Islam spread in Egypt? How did it spread in Spain and Portugal? How did it spread in Iraq, Syria, other lands? And Bullitt shows that usually it spreads, it takes about 200 years, 250 years for it to become majority. So you might say it's not that fast, because again, Muslims never made people convert, ever. We don't do that. It's not allowed in our law. Not allowed at all. So for Islam to become the majority population in Syria or in Egypt, that took time. And he studies that really well. It's very valuable. In fact, Spain and Portugal go faster than other places. Spain and Portugal are relatively rapid in the conversion of their majorities to Islam in many places. But one of the important things that Bullitt does is that he says that when you look at Islam, you must never forget the importance of the edge. The edge. He said you have to always watch the edges. What's the edge? Where would be the edge of the Muslim world? You're sitting on it. You are sitting on it. You are the edge. You are the edge. The edge is where, and he doesn't want to use the word periphery, because we say this is peripheral, this is marginal. So he uses the word edge. The edge will be wherever Islam is flowing, so that Muslims who have background in Islam, like most of you, that have families that have South Asian or Arab or other background, where people like that who bring with them Islam and Islamic culture are mixing with people like this and people like this and people like some of these brothers over here, that brother, converts. And when these two mix, then you have the edge. And he says the edge is where the most incredible things will happen. Why? I don't remember that he actually goes into that, but because of the fact that this is the place where Islam has to make sense to the convert. It's got to relate to that culture. It's got to receive challenges and have adequate responses. So many of the great developments of Islamic civilization will come from the edge. That, I believe, is true. And that's why also this community that we have, which is remarkable, remarkable. You know, it is the perfect edge. We are in a land which is at the cutting edge of technology and development and world power. It's a really strategic place to be, and the Canadians are too. Our brothers and sisters to the north. And not only that, but we are a Muslim community that has incredible talent, incredible capacity. We do have that. We do have that. So it's like when we talked about the challenges and responses that we've talked about today, you can do that. You are capable of that challenge, inshallah. But we have to all work together on this. This means that we have to cohere. This means that we have to get our act together. This means that we have to build institutions. But we can do that bi'ithnillahi ta'ala. And I believe it is our obligation. And then when that happens, it can bring the whole ummah to life. And let's not be foolish and let's not go overboard. Let's be humble, right? Let's be humble. But a lot of our sheikhs have said in the past years that if the fragrance of God's remembrance ever proceeds from the West, and the scent of it is caught in the East, the sick man will get well. The sick man will get well. Islam is like this. The Muslim world today has been hurt and crushed, But you and I, we don't feel that so much. Some of you may, but I don't, because I grew up here. Okay? And that means that there are things that we can do, there's work that we can do that other people, maybe you can't expect them to do that right now. They're in a really difficult situation, and it gets worse and worse and more difficult. The Muslim world is also the best real estate in the world. It's always been that way. And that's why it's very strategic. And that's why also there are a lot of people that they're not necessarily that friendly, because if, for example, the Syrian people have victory, and may Allah give the Syrian people victory, Syria is the most strategic part of the whole puzzle. I wrote a book called The Islamic Struggle in Syria. I wrote it when I was at the University of Michigan, and I wrote it about the tyrant that was there in those days, Hafez Assad. Okay, I wrote that, and you can get that book if you want. But that's one of the things I began with, that you have to understand that Syria is the most strategic part of the puzzle. If Syria ever becomes free, if Syria ever is able to do what the Syrian people want to do, then the whole configuration of that part of the world will change. If Syria becomes the friend of Turkey, and they would be good friends now, Turkey and Syria become extremely influential in the world. And whose benefit is that to? Well, it's to our benefit, but not to Russia's, not to China, not to a lot of other people. And if Syria and Egypt both become friends and begin to work together, Syria and Egypt become really powerful. Because one of the main ways that the Muslim world was controlled was divide and conquer. When the colonial period is over, we will cut your countries up into little pieces that can never work independently. And if Syria stands on its own feet, that puzzle begins to change. And that's why, unfortunately, the Syrian people have no friend but God. They have no friend but Allah. And of course, we have Muslims. We love them. We pray for them. You've got to pray for the Syrian people, because nobody's going to help them in the world out there. They will let them bleed and bleed and bleed. That's genocide that's happening in Syria. Call it by its name. It's not a civil war. It's genocide. Genocide, pure and simple. Okay? So they will be bled and bled and bled, and they will try to keep no one from having victory. And that's because Syria is very strategic. We ask Allah Azza wa Jal to give victory to the Syrian people. Al-Fatiha. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. We also have a sister who passed away today, and her name was Dula Muhammad, and she has 4 children, she has a husband. So let's all ask Allah to give her forgiveness, and let's all make dua for her. Al-Fatiha for Dula Muhammad. Ameen. Bismillah. Alhamdulillah.
Okay, I think we got to close up now. Dr. Umar, if you can do a closing dua.
Okay, anyway, it was an honor to be with you. Honor to be with you. May Allah enable us to work together. May Allah enable us to work together. Ameen, ameen, ameen. اللهم وفقنا لما تحبه وترضى واجعلنا من عبيدك السعداء وأمتنا على كلمة الهدى. علمنا ما ينفعنا ووفقنا للعمل بما علمتنا به واجعل ما نحن فيه خالصا مخلصا لوجهك الكريم يا رب العالمين. اللهم اجعل تجمعنا هذا تجمعا مرحوما وتفرقنا بعده تفرقا معصوما لا شقيا منا ولا محروما. آمين 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 يا رب العالمين. والسلام عليكم. It's an honor to be with you, a joy to be with you. This weekend was vacation.